Hello, brothers and sisters. I assume at this point, many, if not all of you, have heard at least something about the recent deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and about the demonstrations and even riots occurring in the aftermath. I wanted to speak to you in the most personal way available to us right now about some of the particular ways that we are called to respond. This isn't going to be anywhere close to comprehensive. I don't know the full proper response, but I want to address some of our specific responsibilities as Christians and as Christians in our particular time and place, and as the people of Calvin. So I wanted to take a few minutes to talk to you about lament and intercession and the kind of love we're called to in Christ. So as Christians, we're called to lament, which we've talked a lot about the last couple of years. So maybe we're in some ways somewhat better prepared than we would have been. Lament is grief pointed at God. As you interact with this, as confusion or disgust or rage or the vague sense of guilt or an impulse to do something all well up in you, I would encourage all of your engagement to be marked more than anything else by prayerful grieving. As you read and learn, as you, I hope, will listen to the voices of wise people who have lived in this country in less comfortable position than you and I, particularly people of other races, be grieved and turn that grief toward God, who does not shy away from ultimate responsibility for the way the world is. I'm reminded of at the beginning of this year when we were starting out in Habakkuk, Andy defined grief for us as both honest and hopeful. That's stuck with me ever since and has been a really helpful rubric. Lament honestly. Be honest about how difficult and entrenched things are when it comes to race relations in our country, when it comes to the use of power, when it comes to how and when and why to speak out and resist and seek change. Say to God again and again, I don't know. Only you know. Why won't you show us the way? Please show us the way. Be honest with him. Be honest even in confession. You and I may or may not have sinned individually out of some degree of racism. I'm not even sure I know the answer to that for my own heart. I certainly don't for yours. But the Bible teaches again and again, Old and New Testament, about corporate responsibility, that we are not a loose collection of individuals, either as a church or as a society, but that we bear real responsibility to and for one another. And so we have some part in what is going on that I can't fully explain to you, but it needs to be acknowledged and confessed. Psalm 130 says, if you, O Lord, would mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? We're all guilty. Daniel, the prophet, in Daniel chapter 9, prays a prayer of confession that from everything we know about Daniel doesn't apply to him, but he prays it on behalf of the whole people of Israel. We have acted wickedly. We have forgotten you. We have failed. Let your lament carry that note of honest, even if it's honest and bewildered confession as well. But let your lament also be hopeful. We take our grief to God because He, unlike any of our leaders, knows what to do with it. Psalm 46, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And we are collectively in trouble. And then the psalmist goes on, come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. And then be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted on the earth. This is a dark chapter, but it is a dark chapter in the story God is telling. And because God is telling it, we know it is a good story and that it will end well. And so our laments can end in hope. We have the privilege and the responsibility of lament. We also are responsible as Christians for intercession. And I mean specifically praying against the spiritual powers at work among us. These problems of justice, of power, of race, of communication, they are multidimensional. And I'm not in any way attempting to diminish the cultural or social or historical or psychological or economic dimensions at play here. Those are real and powerful and should be addressed. But as I speak to us specifically as Christians, we have a specific responsibility to take up the spiritual dimension, to recognize that in addition to economic and social and historical and psychological and legal wickedness, there is spiritual wickedness at work too. And so we have the responsibility to pray against that. Jesus took this extremely seriously during his life on earth, going face to face with powers and principalities, with demons. There are demons fostering division, racism, injustice, misunderstanding, brutality, and abuse of power among us as a society. Demons fostering indifference and defensiveness and fatalism and triumphalism. And we are in a position to recognize that and to pray against them, to invoke God's name and cry out for his Spirit to be the most powerful, to be the most active, to determine the outcome. And so I would encourage you to spend time interceding for our nation in recognition of the spiritual realities at play. That's a responsibility we carry as the church that the rest of society cannot carry. Not to say we won't also participate in those other dimensions. I hope we do. I don't know how we will. But let's take up the spiritual mantle that's been laid upon us. So lament and intercession and love. The second great commandment, which is the mirror image of the first great commandment to love God, is to love our neighbor who is made in God's image. And of course, specifically right now, it applies to neighbors of different races and backgrounds from us, neighbors who, unlike most of us at Calvin, have not experienced living in the United States of America as predominantly a blessing. I freely admit this is strange to take up in Corvallis. The historic structural racism of where we live starts with laws preventing African Americans from living in the state and continues with really high housing prices that prevent most people from moving here. And so we're left with a different selection of neighbors from Minneapolis or Atlanta or Ferguson. But there are people around us whom God specifically calls us to love. And I do mean specifically. The second great commandment is not love your nation or all the people of your nation. It is love your neighbor. If there is no one springing to mind right now, ask God, show me whom I should love as my neighbor. Jesus promised to ask for things that are in accord with my will, and you will receive. And I believe if you ask him, you will receive. If we ask him as a church, we will receive as a church. And then to seek the good of your neighbor. Seek the good of your neighbor with enduring compassion, not expecting to have them assuage any sense of guilt you feel over being privileged and being, if you're listening to this, probably white. Not expecting to be some incredible lever of change in your neighbor's life, but committing to stay the course with them, to join them in their trials and sorrows, whatever they may be. We have a God who stays the course with us, who shared our sorrows and bore our sorrows for us on the cross, and his Spirit lives in us, and so we are empowered by God's presence in us to love in a way that is deeper and more committed and more personal than what's generally on offer. And so ask God for a place to exercise the power he's given you, and then throw yourself in to doing so. I want to wrap this up by returning to Psalm 130, which I quoted earlier. I'm going to read the psalm as a prayer that I hope you'll join me in, and then send us out to lament and to intercede and love. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to the voice of my pleas for mercy. If you, O Lord, should mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But with you, O Lord, there is justice, that you may be feared. I wait for the Lord, and in his word I hope. I wait for the Lord, more than watchmen for the morning, more than watchmen for the morning. O Israel, hope in the Lord. For with the Lord is steadfast love, and with him is plentiful redemption, and he will redeem us out of all our iniquities. May it be so. Amen.